We shall be discussing the biblical license for man to mistreat animals in our next lecture on atheist ethics. Schopenhauer combined deep insights into the human condition with a consummate literary talent. He is a philosopher almost alone since Locke in his influence on great writers and thinkers. The list of his influence is long. Tolstoy and Turgenev, one a theist, the other an atheist. Proust and Zola, Thomas Mann, Hardy, Conrad, Maupassant, Chekhov, Malm, and Borges. Karl Popper, the philosopher, was influenced by him. Nietzsche said that it was the reading of Schopenhauer that turned him into a philosopher. And even the great 20th century Wittgenstein began his philosophizing from a starting point provided by Schopenhauer. Thank you for your attention this evening. This lecture concludes Atheist Philosophies. We covered some of my favorite philosophers and thinking, and I hope you had as good a time as I.
Excellent.
I have some questions about existentialism. First of all, what is existentialism's relationship to atheism?
Well, I think the fact that atheism sees, that existentialism sees the world as empty, that we've killed God, the atheist existentialists. Now, you know, there's the Christian existentialists like Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky and Hospers from the French. They're Christian existentialists. So they believe in making a choice, but they still keep a theistic, view. I don't see really how they can do it. Frankly, I haven't studied them enough to really understand the movement of their thinking or the logic of their thinking. But the very fact that we see a void, that the universe is meaningless, and the man demands meaning, seems to me to be very, very conjoined with atheism. You don't see it that way?
No, I do.
Oh, okay.
I do. I'm shaking my head because
okay.
It seems like it would be a stretch to say that you could be a Christian existentialist.
Yeah.
But this also goes to what is then the definition of existentialism? Is it simply ontology?
Yeah.
Or is it more than that? Is it something beyond just a study of being?
Well, it's a sense that you can only create being, essence, by making choices that you create yourself. Remember, most of them say that you're not born with any essential, being, ontology. You're just kind of thrown there, like Heidegger says, or as Sartre says, So you create the human being as you grow and make choices. Now, of course, as de Beauvoir pointed out, they didn't take into account childhood and the lack of freedom that a child has, and that the developmental stages of children. So, I mean, there's lacks in the philosophy and errors. And also, of course, as we know now, we don't have as much free will as we thought we did. And that's a difficulty, at least according to neurological, experiments and what have you. But most thinkers now that have resonance for me are like Dennett, that believe in compatibilism, that you can have, determinism somewhat, and, you can also have free will.
Are you going to look at that in the future in
Yeah,
any of your lectures?
Yeah, I am. I have it in AtheistScholar.org, and I plan to expand that, because I'm trying to study it right now.
Is existentialism a complete philosophy in the sense of earlier philosophies, or is it really just a framework in which to add one's beliefs, to collect one's beliefs?
I think it's more of a framework. But I think when Sartre wrote his Being and Nothingness, I think he expected it to be seen as a complete philosophy. It's this argument all the time, is Ayn Rand's philosophy a complete philosophy? Oh, she left out this or that, is Sartre's, is existentialism a complete philosophy? But then what do you do with Nietzsche?
People use that term existentialist or existential in just talking about a fear of death or a search for meaning.
Or anxiety.
or just
Dread.
general anxiety, is that actually a correct use of the word existential? Or when we say existential, are we really referring to this philosophy of making choices?
That's what we should be referring to, but you know, here's the problem, as I said earlier in my lecture, that it's reached the street.
Yeah.
And so people use it all the time. If you recall, when we were like searching for films, a lot of them were described as existential when they really weren't really existential at all.
Yeah, and that's been my problem looking up the term, and also when I looked at the Jewish existentialists, what they were really talking about is theodicy and trying to explain why we suffer and what to do in light of suffering. It really wasn't about the Sartre's existentialism. It was something different. It was about suffering and explaining why God still matters.
Right.
That's not, to me, that is not existentialism. That is just, and they use the phrase with a lowercase e, that is just some catchword, you know, for Jewish philosophy, not for what you and I think would call existentialism.
Well, what I find fascinating and very hard to understand, but that I haven't been through that experience, is many of these really good thinkers and writers came through the Hitler's death camps, and some of them emerged still theists. To me, I just find that, you know, incredible. I can't imagine. I can't imagine if I went through an experience like that and survived, that and witnessed what you had to, and I think sometimes what you had to do yourself to survive. I can't imagine that I would come out with any sense of God. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, that's what the modern Jewish philosophers, that's what they do talk about, is that the idea of God has to change, not that he has to go away, but that he doesn't have that direct relationship in our lives, and that it's left to man to make a better world, to make, for example, the state of Israel as a result of the Holocaust, or to make the world a better place, and to prove Hitler wrong, to
I see.
propagate and cause Jews, the Jewish population, to grow in response to what Hitler tried to do. So that's how they begin to rephrase or reframe their religion into some sort of modern global humanism, not just a Jewish God, but a God of humans.
I get it.
And
Yeah,
it's not existentialist. It's something completely different.
No.
And so I am disturbed by how the term is thrown around. It doesn't refer to what it originally did.
I want to comment on something that there's in behind all of these discussions about this is there's always this phase where we're going to think now in terms of humanism. God does not have a direct. God is over here now. What's happening, from what I can see, is that over a period of time, as we've moved into more technology, we've moved to a better understanding of nature, we can see further into the universe, we can see further into the cells and so forth. God keeps shrinking. And the theologians have picked this up. They know that. And so they're now making excuses. As far as I'm concerned, they keep making excuses for God being less and less and less, and man has more responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is only of the unknown.
But they don't say that. They don't come right
Yeah.
out and say that. But that's what they're saying.
Yeah, and then it's propaganda. It's a way
Yes,
of
of course
trying
it is.
to explain away the obvious
Not just
contrast.
Jewish, Christian. The only ones that it doesn't
Christians
apply
do
to
it
is
too.
the Islamics, I guess. They wouldn't buy that at all.
No, I think even modern American Muslims would do that too.
Yeah.
Yes,
Would
yes.
try to explain it away.
Yeah.
To give
The
credit where credit's due,
incompatibilities.
American Muslims, would back off. Yeah.
We're almost getting to the point with some thinkers of like back to the way Epicurus believed. That although whether he believes in the gods or not, he just I think didn't want to be, prosecuted for non-belief. But he just said that they like dwelt in these other planets between the spheres or whatever, and didn't concern themselves with us, so we didn't have to concern ourselves with them. So let's just go ahead and work out a philosophy of life, you know. So they were like very remote and didn't care about us. We didn't care about them, and that was it. You know, it reminds me, we were almost getting to that.
Yeah. And so I wrote down, is existentialism only a question, or is it also an answer?
Oh, good question.
Or is it a framework?
So
I think it's a framework. That's a good, yeah.
So
I
a
think
framework would mean that it doesn't have the answer. It's
It
just,
doesn't have everything.
No, you're supposed to do this.
Yeah. But then you're left with a problem is, well, what's the difference between that and ontological philosophy? What do you have if you don't have anything more than a framework? You just have this question of being, of what does it mean to be alive?
Right. Well, you
But
see,
that's-
but you create that.
Yeah, so it's more than just what does it mean to being alive.
Yeah. Yeah, it means that you know, you create yourself as a
Yeah.
full person.
It's a partial answer at the
Yeah.
very least.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that part I really, I love about existentialism.
And I think you, forget which philosopher it was, but you talked about the existentialist relations to others, and you know, Sartre's being for others,
Right,
being for oneself.
right.
And so you could maybe reframe existentialism as it's truly the relationship to oneself
Yes,
that is of concern.
Yes.
That the other people are certainly around that,
Yeah.
but they're not the primary concern. It's the relationship to oneself, and how does one relate and take responsibility for
and
oneself.
create your project. Or, yeah, because they were very influenced by existential thinking. And
that's how it
and
filtered-
humanism.
filtered around.
And humanism, yeah.
But why did this emerge only in the 19th century? What was it about the 19th century, you know, the 20th century that caused this framework to come together? I mean,
I
you could have
think-
thought about this in the Middle Ages.
Well, they can't. That's a big question. See, you know, actually, when I do atheist history, we'll be into that.
Which is coming up.
Yeah, that's coming up too when we get back, and from the Reason Round, we'll be covering it in April then. Yeah. There's a lot of thinkers, and there's a famous French thinker who you'll hear my lecture, who propagated the idea, and we're not sure if it's true or not, that people couldn't think their way into absolutely no God. They could like disbelieve certain area, like virgin birth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this
that's
is
a-
really important because
Yeah.
this was like almost like a fact. And they said that until about the Enlightenment, that men couldn't think about, you know, the fact of there being absolutely no God. And that's, you know, Enlightenment, they started to think about science and what have you. So, you know, Marlowe, the writer of Faust, he was a contemporary of Shakespeare. When I was at a lecture, I asked him, the lady professor, and she didn't feel that Marlowe was a true atheist because she said that they couldn't have that total concept of atheism. I know, it's extremely difficult. I know. I mean, but you know, she's an expert in those areas, okay, and I'm not. So, but it's interesting because Berman has written a really interesting book, and I will be covering some of his ideas because he believes that there was atheism very early, and there are some thinkers now that have, but you know, we don't have enough data. We don't have, people were called atheists that just didn't believe in the virgin birth or scoffed at, you know, other concepts, the resurrection and what have you. And we don't have enough data, a lot of it. But we do have some things. I mean, we have things that like priests that are saying that they talk to people, you know, that were atheists and everything. But actually, atheists we don't have until, you know, the Enlightenment era. And you know, I have the dates in my lecture on atheist history.
I wonder if that, again, we have the social, the societal and legal pressure not to have it known that you were an atheist.
Yeah, but they were burned a lot of times because they disputed, you know, certain tenets of Christianity.
Rather than
So,
saying,
yeah,
I don't believe in God,
right,
they're saying,
right.
I don't believe in the virgin birth.
Yeah, this was
You're
enough.
dead.
Yeah, or resurrection, or yeah. And Marlowe and a lot of his friends, I mean, Marlowe might have been spying for the establishment because he would be called in regularly on, you know, because other people that they had brought in and tortured and what have you implicated him, and then they would question him, all of a sudden he'd be let loose, which is very odd because most people weren't allowed to leave, you know, when there's charges. But it looks like he was with a lot of friends who scoffed at a lot of tenets of Christianity. Was he an atheist? No way of knowing. It's really difficult.
But it's your position that existentialism could not have come about until after the Enlightenment?
You know, I'm not sure if it's my position or not. You know, I'm only going by experts, but it seems to me that, you know, as we approach the really death of God, like Nietzsche said, where it became more widespread. I mean, because atheism, if it was thought probably by more sophisticated thinkers, although I'm sure there were some ordinary people that just didn't believe and just didn't say anything. But I think that all these things had to come together. With this sense of alienation, maybe the extremity of industrialism in the cities.
But that strengthens the argument that existentialism is really something more than just, you know, thinking about man's meaning or man's purpose, that it has this post-God,
yeah,
that you can't be a Christian atheist, Christian existentialist, because you can't really believe in God and be an existentialist.
Yeah, except that there's a lot of them. I mean, not a lot of them, but they're formidable ones. Kierkegaard.
They used their religion. They thought that they could strengthen their religion.
Yeah.
But is that actually a valid, coherent point of view?
To me, it is not.
Doesn't seem very coherent.
No.
Also, I'm wondering about the role of war in the philosophers' thinking about existentialism, especially Camus and Sartre, because they were right in the middle of occupation by the Nazis.
They belong to the resistance,
and
too.
then Heidegger, you know, was also right at the time of Hitler's peak. So don't you think that war and the death that was caused by war influenced these thinkers greatly?
Oh, I think you're right.
And I don't know what was going on in Germany in the time of Nietzsche, but I think that probably there was also some, you know, wars. There were religious wars that had gone on for centuries. Yeah, and there were like all kinds of like little European wars, and then, you know, the 7 years. So I think it was just this trend to like modernity. And after World War I, there was is it the Lost Generation? Were they existentialists? Were they? No, they were almost nihilists. Not quite. No, you know, actually, that's a good question, because I know you don't like Hemingway, and I do, very much. And but Hemingway had kind of, he can't be defined as an existentialist, but he had that. I always think of him as an existentialist, and I know I shouldn't, but he had that grace under fire. You know, you have this ethos, and you'll live by it, and you'll know that you're going to be crushed by the world. You know that you're going to probably be killed. And he killed himself. Yeah, he did. He did. Well, remember, he was in like really bad health, and I think he wasn't writing very well anymore, partly as a result of his physical problems. His father had killed himself. There's other members of the family that have since killed themselves, so there must be some kind of something running through. And I mean, I don't know. Or maybe, some psychologists say that if your parent commits suicide, it kind of gives you permission to do it. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know what the statistics are on that. But,
Yeah, I admire Hemingway because he believes in, like, you know, facing these things and living them and knowing that you'll probably be crushed. And like he says, like, if you're brave or good or whatever, you'll probably be crushed all that sooner by the world.
I think his suicide was not cowardly. I think
No.
it was
A choice.
Yeah, it was a
very
choice,
I
yeah.
think suicide is more of a choice. Once again, it's a choice.
I'm sorry that
Some
we.
philosophers have said that it's a nasty, it's the wrong choice, it's in bad faith. But I tend to disagree with it. I think there's a lot of people who have made a noble decision to do that.
Well, suicide was not that, you know, considered that bad until Christianity came along. I mean, the Romans regularly did it.
Out of honor or out of?
Yeah, it was part of their ethical system. Sometimes they did it, you know, like Seneca died very bravely, although people considered him a hypocrite. But part of the reason was if you came under displeasure by the emperor and you didn't kill yourself before you were tried and executed, they would confiscate your family's fortune. So a lot of them would do that so to save their family's, you know, property and what have you.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, a lot of people felt like when they came to the limits of their life, that maybe they were like ill and couldn't face anything, it was considered an honorable thing to do, you know. The Greeks didn't do it as much, but it wasn't disapproved, you know, as it became under the Christian thing. The Christian thing was you were going to go to hell, you know, and you couldn't even be buried, remember, in hallowed ground if you committed suicide. So there was a big change.
Well, yeah, the Jews had that same idea.
See?
That it was a shame and that it was that's God's domain. They
See?
still have that. God's domain decides when you die.
Yeah.
Not, you do not decide, which again is an existentialist point of view, is I decide, or does God decide?
There you go. Well, it's funny, I had a girlfriend, and in one of her suicide attempts, she ended up in the water, and the policeman that fished her out, the first words that he said to her, "Don't you know this is against the law?"
Young say you're breaking the law.
No, I think he was serious.
He was serious. That wasn't a joke, he was serious.
Or she thought he was, I guess.
He knows all the codes, see, they follow the codes.
I think he probably wasn't a very thoughtful.
No,
You
he
know,
was following
person.
the codes, it's in the book, page 17.
Hey lady, this is
Suicide
against the law, yeah.
a criminal offense.
You mentioned will to power is the internal struggle.
You know, this is interesting. This is what
yes.
people say about, you know, Nietzsche. I'm not altogether sure. I think sometimes it is the control, the mastery over the self. I think it really is in his works. You can see that. He talks about that a lot. That shifting self with all those desires. And he knows that it moves very, very quickly. We're not as complete as we think we are. That's, I think, what the postmodernists were very good at, you know, discussing. But there's that other sense. I think that he does see it as a will to power in the world too.
Yeah, that's.
Well, people try to explain a lot of the objectionable things about Nietzsche away because they admire him so much.
Yeah, but I object to that kind of apologist thinking because no, I think he really was talking about competition.
Yeah, sometimes.
Between people and what really motivates people, and that it wasn't money or comfort or even praise, but it was this will to power, to have power.
I'll agree with you, yeah, I'll agree with you there. But it was also self-mastery.
Also the
So it was
internal
both.
struggle,
It was both.
power over yourself.
I think that's all I had about existentialism.
It's just like when they talk about jihad.
Yeah.
Which is it? Is it like the struggle against, you know, the Christian enemy or whatever,
Any enemy, doesn't have to be Christian, Buddhist,
any enemy,
right.
or is it the self-control? And a lot of Islamic thinkers say it's the self-control. It's very difficult to interpret.
Yeah, but at least when I talk about the will to power or to competition, I'm not talking about killing people. I'm talking about gaining in society over your fellow man.
Right. Yeah. There's always that.
This idea that you will be able to have more power than your fellow neighbor will have.
Well, Nietzsche talks about it, that the nobles in this society were the guys that were able to, like, overcome the weak and, you know, grab up all the, you know, the riches and the castles and everything like that. So I think you're right. I mean, but, you know, it's a very unpopular point of view to put forth. And we have to remember that he also was talking about self-mastery. He talks about different things. This is the trouble. That's why I said that there's a different Nietzsche every minute.
Eight different threads in American.
Yeah, you can find whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even this article on Jewish existentialism, they say that Nietzsche was an anti-Semite. It's just
I know,
repeats
they
over
won't
and over
stop.
again.
They won't
Come
stop.
on.
And it's
That's
very
been
unfortunate.
disproven, so.
Don't need it.
But you mentioned the assertive skeptics. It sounds like they were atheists.
Probably. It's really hard to tell because they were part of Plato's school. They were like directors of his academy, and Plato believed in these ideal forms.
Yeah.
And he and Socrates also had some kind of idea of a daemon, and you know, so they really weren't atheists. So I don't know that these fellows were probably a real, what you would consider a real atheist, not coming from Plato's school.
What is the difference between assertive skepticism and non-assertive skepticism?
The one is where they argue their position, you know, like nothing's known and they'll argue it. And the other is a Pyrrho's position where, you know, nothing can be known, but, you know, if you realize this, you'll become relaxed and tranquil in your life, and you don't carry it around and argue it with people.
More Buddhist type.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's like a more Buddhist thing. Although he had a good school of followers, but they weren't aggressive about it. They weren't heads of schools either, you know.
And I'm told that Descartes' famous phrase is really should be translated, I doubt, therefore I am.
Well, cogito is like I think, really.
But there's something in the way that it was translated. Cogito is it the same? I think because I'm thinking about uncertainty.
Well, I think, yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Not the act of thinking, but I think. Having some doubt.
I think he was pretty sure that he thought. He's pretty sure that he
because,
thought.
but you mentioned that phrase in light of the skeptics and the skepticism, that it had to do with his ability to doubt.
Yeah, but he also had to come to some solid ground somewhere, or at least he felt he had to.
Yeah, which was arbitrary.
Which the postmodernists didn't feel you had to do, but
right.
He really did. Well, because he wanted to really defeat atheism. See, yeah, it was part of his thing, yeah. And, and the unfortunate thing is that, you know, he really made it worse for theism and God, you know.
So he was reacting against the Enlightenment?
Not so much. He was a little bit before. I think he was reacting against some ideas that were floating around. Maybe not atheism, I shouldn't say that, doubt too much, but he made it worse. A lot of these guys made it a lot worse. You know, the more they argued and the more they came up with these great ideas, the worse it became.
Yeah,
You'll see that when I do atheist history, you know. You'll see like the Duns Scotus and some of the, you know, famous monks after Aquinas grounded faith, you know, religion kind of, or belief in God and everything just on faith. Because they didn't feel it would hold up with logic, which Aquinas was trying to do. And so what they did was pin it on faith, and that didn't do too well later. So they kind of, you know, helped destroy it, really. Interestingly, great defenders.
And why wasn't Hume an atheist?
We don't know.
Because everything you said, or you quoted him as saying.
I know, we don't know. It's like, this is another thing, it depends what scholar you're reading at the time. I mean, I can read a book review sometimes in the New York Times, and the reviewer will say Hume was not an atheist, he was an agnostic. And then you read somebody else and you say he was an atheist. Now, if Boswell, the famous biographer, is telling the truth, he was the biographer of, like, Johnson. And Boswell always went around, but sometimes he wasn't really truthful. But he visited Hume just shortly before Hume died. Hume was dying and knew he was dying. And from Boswell's account, Hume did not believe in God. I think I'll be reading that account, I think, in the history and everything like that. In fact, you know, Hume, and he said that he was in Boswell reports, because Boswell was very religious, but Boswell reports that Hume was in good spirits and not worried at all, you know, about his impending death and everything. So Boswell considered him like a non-believer. I don't know, Norm, I really don't know. You know, that there's all these different reports about these people. You know, he wouldn't allow his, you know, his most devastating attacks on religion to be published during his lifetime.
No, he was afraid.
Yeah, I don't blame him either, you know. It was dangerous, and besides, he was a very kind of a fat guy and very cheerful. And he liked living large. He liked living the good life. He liked billiards, he liked food, he liked drink, he liked good company, and I don't think he wanted to disrupt his life. He wrote this history of England that made him a lot of money. And I remember collectors used to come to my store if they would find like a nice set, you know, like they'd get it, although you know, it certainly has been, you know, superseded by about 50 other men. But it's like something to read if you're into like English history. They would get really excited about it. So I think he didn't want to call down, you know, like the forces of, you know, the establishment on himself.
That's it.
Yeah, I really don't. I suspect that he was probably an atheist and he was kind of careful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but do we have any proof? No. See, we don't have proof of a lot of these people.
And then what year would you date modern skepticism from? This idea, you know, the skeptics.
It would be Descartes. It would be Descartes. Well, you know, in a sense. Or are you thinking of like...
I think it would be later than.
Well, it would be Hume. It would be Hume.
This debunking, this American, you know, style debunking, like you mentioned several organizations.
Yeah.
The Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and they must have had predecessors. I'm thinking of Benjamin Franklin was actually hired to investigate Mesmer and to find out whether mesmerism was true or not. And one of the presidents actually asked him to look into that.
Oh, wow.
Because it was causing a great stir in the United States, and they were afraid that this was fraud. So I'm just wondering whether you had some date for what you and I would call, you know, modern skeptical inquiry of any kind of claim, you know, flim-flam.
Don't you think it's kind of a strand in American thinking?
Well, but at one time, you know, these things were commonplace, right? Where people would be making these kinds of claims about miraculous potions and drugs, and it wasn't really an organized movement to debunk it or regulate it or outlaw it. All of these, like, you know,
Good way to make money.
The patent medicines.
Yeah.
Patent medicine's all the
Before
snake
the
oil.
FDA, you could sell whatever you wanted to,
Yeah.
make any claim you wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And there wasn't any kind of organization to say, no, you're making this up.
I don't think that they really organized. I mean, you know, Mark Twain was a big debunker.
Okay.
William James, although I don't ever think that he left the idea of religion alone, but he in his, you know, he and another other psychologists, they would like conduct continuous researches into, you know, there'd be a famous medium here, or there'd be a report of something there, and they would go and investigate, and they never turned up anything other than the fact that these things are personal, you know, varieties of religious experience. They never turned up anything solid, anything objective. You know, and
But
he certainly tried hard.
He was trying to prove it or to disprove it?
I think he would have liked to approve it, but I think he was trying to prove whether it was true or not. I think he was a little more objective.
True-
I think
true
he
or
would have been
false, yeah.
not unhappy had he found something, you know, true about some of these things. I don't think he would have been unhappy at all. But being, you know, an honest man and in the general spirit of a true inquiry, he wasn't going to fudge like so many people do today with like the effects of prayer on health and what have you. You know, this wasn't his kind of thing. I think this strain of skepticism runs through the American thought.
And British.
Yeah, and British, but I think, you know, when I think the Americans had this real sense, you know, because they dropped the idea of the king, you know, I think that, you know, you have these debunkers, you have Mark Twain, sometimes Franklin, you just have that, you know, I'm from Missouri, show me, you know, that kind of thing, yeah.
18th century, 19th century.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't, I mean, Twain, you know, like debunks a lot of things. You know, and there's a lot of like other writers too. I mean, you know, Thoreau and Emerson. You know, despite some of their fuzzy kind of oversoul thinking, they were pretty hard thinkers otherwise, and in terms of, you know, experience and truth. Yeah, they didn't believe a whole lot. And then, you know, you have some of the doubters that were never happy. Hawthorne said of Melville that he could neither be happy believing in God or not believing in him. And so you have Melville that's like always, you know, if you read his, you know, Moby Dick, you see he's always on the thing, is nature evil, is nature, you know, kind of a mask where there's an evil behind it. And Schopenhauer kind of believed that too, that will that he talks about was perhaps a genuine evil.
And what country was Schopenhauer from?
Germany.
Germany.
Yeah.
So he influenced Nietzsche.
Very
Nietzsche
much,
quite a
yeah,
bit.
yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah,
He was
I'm
a
actually-
nasty man, but, you know, he's an important thinker, really clarified a lot of things, or opened questions maybe, rather than clarified.
And was he one of the first to write against Christianity, to publish that way against?
Well, you have some of the Enlightenment people. Remember, you have the Baron de Holbach. What year was that? I gave it my lecture. I'll be bringing it up again. That's Enlightenment.
That was
You
early.
had a priest, La Mettrie. I mentioned him too, that he wrote, you know, atheist tracts. And there's a British, I'll be mentioning that in atheist history, there's a British thing who they're answering Dr. Priestley, who was actually a Unitarian, and, you know, he discovered oxygen and people didn't like his position on religion, and they burned his house down. He had to come to America.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. But they're answering Priestley, and they're saying, don't doubt that there's no atheist, because here I'm writing this atheist tract. Yeah, so yeah, right about then is when people started to say, you know, we are atheists in
What
Britain and in the, I don't have the year, I'm sorry, but it was a little after Baron de Holbach, which would be the late 1700s. So all of a sudden, there's all these people saying, like, you know, hey, I'm an atheist, you know.
So they must have come out of hiding. There must have been already a movement well before that.
There had to be something. That's what a lot of thinkers. It's really interesting. I'll be covering that very thoroughly because my position is that, you know, our history has been hidden, kind of, and it's still in doubt, you know, and it's so hard. So you have some scholars. You don't have enough because I don't think it pays enough. You know, maybe they don't get published enough, but you have some scholars that have, you know, like studied the history of certain publications and what have you, and they believe that there was atheism earlier. I don't know if we'll ever know for sure, but I think there must have been.
Well,
Who would admit it? I mean, I wouldn't even admit that I didn't believe in the virgin birth back then. I mean, it's amazing how stubborn people were and how brave.
Look in this country within our lifetimes, with our lifespans, to stand up and say I'm an atheist.
Yeah, I mean, right now. But I mean, but they don't put you on the rack.
No, but they can screw up your job.
They can screw up your job and everything, but I mean, you were tortured, you were burned,
Well,
and they
torn to
confiscated,
pieces.
you know, your property, your
Gave
family.
up your property, your family was turned off
Yeah,
the road.
I mean, I can't believe how many brave people there were.
And also, I think it was the historians who were writing about these people were Christians, so they weren't going to bring out those facts.
That's
Thank
the
you.
trouble.
About these people.
Yeah, see,
Who had first sources.
been buried, yeah.
Yeah, so as now historians also become non-religious, we're going to get a more objective history about it. That's what I'm learning about the Jewish history every time I study Jewish history. It's all written by Jews, and guess what? They have an agenda. They're promoting a certain point of view of the Jewish people,
Sure,
and that's why it's so important that we're here studying these things as atheists
yeah,
and not as religious people. Our perspectives change.
right.
Even something as simple as existentialism, I think your perspective changes when you are an atheist, when you look at that, when you look at what they were thinking about.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's where I would encourage you to do more of that perspectivist thinking or lecturing, because you don't want it just to be another lecture on existentialism. It's like, how does this relate to us as atheists?
Oh, that's interesting.
Where is that common thread? Even if we never knew the term, we would rediscover the sense of choice in choosing to be an atheist, as opposed to being an agnostic. Can an agnostic be an existentialist?
Sure, if a Christian can, why not?
But
I mean,
but no,
you know.
you see that's a bastardization of the term.
Well, it seems to
talking
me
about
silly. I mean, it seems to me silly. If you're viewing the meaninglessness of the world, then obviously there's not a creator who's creating meaning for the world. I mean, for you.
Yeah,
So where is the creator?
To say
So-
If it's a meaningless world, where's the creator?
it's a hostile creator.
Yeah.
It's a,
Well, you could say it
it's
as.
a
Well-
belligerent.
Yeah, the
status.
Greeks some Greeks believed that, ancient
But
Greeks.
it's a stretch. That's a stretch. So,
But they
it's a
did. I
keeping
mean,
absurdity
the Greeks
on
had
top.
a sense that the gods were kind of arbitrary, and if they got in the right mood, they might trick you into some position you'd end up destroyed just because they were in that kind of frame of mind that time. Which actually makes a lot more sense than this all-benevolent God faced with this terrible world.
Right,
They
that's
were-
how they could explain the randomness
Yeah.
of fortune.
Yeah, well, you know, God got mad that day, or that particular God, or maybe I didn't take enough flowers to that one, you know, like temple, and I paid too much attention to that one, and this one got me. It makes a lot more sense,
Yeah.
you know.
But this was good, Mary, thank you. This is, I wish we had more time, especially on the existentialist theme. But I need to do more reading myself on it. That came to mind, I don't know if anybody's ever pointed out the parallels between Nietzsche and Ayn Rand.
That's
I
an
think that, I
interesting.
think that there's some parallels
Yeah,
there.
there are,
You know,
that's a
she
good point.
didn't go insane or anything, but she was a recluse for many, many years, and you know, suffered from depression, and just
Did she suffer from depression?
Oh yeah.
I can find it hard to believe she was like always so certain of her ideas and things.
Well, you know, that can be a cover for many
Maybe it
things.
was, yeah.
But while you were speaking, there was something that triggered that thought in me and maybe it was the existence precedes essence, that Ayn Rand was so tied to this individual making themselves, you know, and the Superman, the ideal man that Nietzsche was talking about as well. And
Yeah.
Victor Hugo actually was her hero
Right.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
which is weird.
Yes.
of the self-made person
Yeah,
rising up above his society.
yeah.
So I thought of, well, Nietzsche also was talking about that, the Übermensch.
Well,
and
that's a good
Ayn
point. I
Rand's-
think that maybe she was influenced and didn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
Because she always claimed she went back to Aristotle
And that was it.
corrected him.
The
Well, I think
source.
she wanted the
That's her
prestige.
source.
Yeah.
See, now that's childishness.
Yeah, well,
That's
she wasn't always a real mature person,
Yeah.
would you say? I mean, you know,
Yeah.
from what I've heard about her. I don't know a lot about her, but.
Well, you know, I mean, she didn't have that kind of education. I don't know what she studied in college, actually, but you haven't heard of anybody writing an essay about Nietzsche and Ayn Rand, about the connection?
No, but it could be easily. And he's not as hard as Heidegger. Heidegger's a hard one. And I become more and more interested, but I've tried, you know, to read his Being and Time, and it's like really hard, so I had to really stick to the people that are explaining him. Because I've just never been able to get the better of those two volumes. They're just very hard. I'll understand a patch here and then a patch here. So I'm really depending on people explaining him. But you know, the more I'm reading the explanations of like really bright people, I'm saying that seeing that he had a lot going. I can see why Hannah Arendt and Jaspers came to his, you know, to save his neck after the war. He really was an important philosopher. And then that second philosophy where he discusses the fact that being, ontology itself, is like being obscured by the technological, and that we focus on technology itself, and that's what people do. You know, when they get a new toy or something, it's
Yes,
like,
they do.
oh boy, and not on the human creativity that created this thing.
Was he responding to some particular technology? Why, what prompted him to write about that?
Technology was like taking off like crazy,
Oh,
and
yes.
it was the beginning of
Accelerating.
information technology too, and he kind of saw that.
In the 40s, in the 50s?
Yeah, yeah.
30s, 40s, 50s.
40s and 50s, yeah. It was after the war.
Gonna give
I think we're
anything
done.
else?
I think kind of we're
Yeah.
done, yeah.
We're finished?
I